So for years, I tried everything to lose weight. I did CrossFit, keto, intermittent fasting, crash dieting, calorie counting. I did everything. No matter what I did, I could not lose weight in my legs or my arms. My waist would get smaller, but I could never make a dent on my legs. And I remember there was this picture that my brother took of me, and I remember looking at it and thinking, something has to be wrong. Like, my limbs look so abnormal. Turns out something was wrong. I have a condition called lipedema. So for me, I had a pretty normal high school, post-puberty body. I didn't really feel different from the other girls. My weight was always stable. I was never overweight or, obese or anything like that. I did sports in high school. I was pretty active. For me, what triggered my lipedema was when I got on birth control in my early 20s. I remember gaining about 80 pounds in 1 year, which is a lot of weight, especially when you're 5'3". And a lot of it just went straight to my legs. Again, I thought, this isn't normal. This isn't something that I see happening with other people. That's when I started going to the gym all the time, doing all these different diets. My legs just never changed in size. Again, I would see differences in my waist. It was just so different from everybody, like my friends that were working out. They would be like, oh, I lost 20, 30 pounds from going to the gym. And, I remember going to the gym all the time and my weight kind of just stayed the same. So for me, what triggered my lipedema was 100% birth control. Then I did IVF to have my son, which was, of course, a lot of hormones. And we know lipedema is triggered by hormonal changes. So having my son through the IVF process and all the hormones that they inject in you with that definitely accelerated lipedema growth. Again, at this time, I'm still, counting calories. I remember going on MyFitnessPal all the time, recording my calories on there, going to the gym. I had a little Garmin watch that would just track everything that I did. And I remember my calories in, calories out was always really good and, just didn't lose weight. Around 2020, I remember I was on Facebook and there was this girl who was asking, she posted a full body picture of her and, she's like, is there something wrong with me? I can't lose weight in my legs. And I remember people were responding and they said, I think you have a condition called lipedema. And this was the first time I had ever heard of lipedema. And I remember texting my sister and being like, have you heard of this condition called lipedema? It affects your legs. And my sister was like, no. And I just started Googling. So I remember, reading all these different things and all these different women were saying that they couldn't lose weight in their legs. And I was like, this is me. And I remember telling my sister, I was like, I don't know if I have it or not, because part of me still wanted the hope that everything I was doing could help me lose weight. And I didn't want to think this was a chronic condition that I have that is resistant to diet and exercise. So that was the first time I ever heard of lipedema. So after I learned about lipedema, I wanted to get as much knowledge as possible. I wanted to know how to prevent my current stage into getting into a progressive stage, 3 or 4. I got a vibration plate, I got a rebounder, weighted vest. I started tailoring my diet to more anti-inflammatory foods. I just wanted to stop the progression from my current stage, which is stage 2. I didn't want to get any worse. My biggest fear with lipedema, and I think with a lot of women in the community, is losing our mobility. That is a huge fear of mine. I want to be active with my son and husband. I don't want to be, having them to wheel me around in a wheelchair because I've lost my mobility. So keeping my stage at a stage 2 was my goal. I didn't want to progress. And I knew surgery was an option. A lot of women in the lipedema community do surgery. I mean, it is what gets rid of it. You go in and you take it out. I just didn't know if that was right for me at the moment. I still thought, if I hit the gym, if I, kept doing keto, then maybe I could reverse my lipedema. And for me, that wasn't possible. I finally made the decision that I need to do surgery. There was just a moment where, previously, like I said, I had just been so dead set that I can manage this. I can be okay with my body and, not have to go through with surgery. But there was a moment this year where I just felt like I need to get this off of my body. I've been carrying it around for, almost 20 years, and it's time that I just get rid of it. And, my husband is super supportive. He called me up and he's like, what are we waiting for? I went down the whole insurance, trying to see if insurance will pay for it, but the insurance that I have has a BMI limit, or not a limit, but there's a BMI requirement that you have to be under a certain BMI requirement before they'll pay for lipedema surgery. And if you're knowledgeable about lipedema, you know that fitting in a BMI is not really realistic for a lot of us because we're carrying around this extra tissue. So I don't meet those requirements. So I am paying 100% out of pocket for my lipedema surgeries. It is a very personal choice for women to make that decision, is surgery right for you? It is a huge thing. You're going through surgery, you're taking out this tissue that you've been hauling around for years. But for me, I reached that point. I knew that I needed to get surgery. So here's what I'm doing. I am getting a brachioplasty. So my lipedema arms right here. For me, this is probably the area that I'm most self-conscious about because I do wear like a lot of dresses. I wear a lot of sundresses, maxi dresses because, that's just what I do with lipedema. So my arms are a very, sensitive area to me. And, we recently went to Disney World and I looked at all the photos that my husband took and all I could focus on was my lipedema arm, which is, such a bad thing to say because I should be focusing on, the memories I'm making with my son, but it's just there. Like lipedema is always there. So for me, I am starting from top to bottom. I made a consultation with a plastic surgeon and I went for my brachioplasty consultation. It was actually very emotional because I was wearing a gown, and he was like, okay, let's take a look at your arms. And he's like, you actually have really pretty arms, which is not something I ever heard or, anybody's ever said to me, but he's like, you actually have really pretty arms. And he's like, I could literally feel a bunch of muscle underneath. He's like, it's just this lipedema tissue that is encasing your arm that people can't see the muscle, and I kind of teared up because, hearing, somebody who's a specialist in this and somebody who knows, about like the fat and the arms, and for him to say that I had like nice arms was, very emotional for me. So he described the surgery and then I was telling him my plan about how I was going to go from top to bottom. So I was going to start with my arms, that I'm going to work on my abdomen contrary to popular belief, lipedema does grow in your torso. And after my pregnancy, I had a lot of loose skin where the lipedema could grow. So it is in my abdomen. So I told him that my next surgery that I wanted to do would be my abdomen. And he was like, oh, let's take a look right now. So I took off my robe completely and he looked at my stomach and he was like, this is a surgery we can combine. And I hadn't even been thinking about doing my abdomen at the same time. He's like, it's really common to do the arms and the abdomen at the same time. And, he said that we would do one called the fleur de lis, which is a vertical and horizontal kind of tummy tuck for better, And, he's like, we would get rid of this tissue and, he's like, I'll give you 2 quotes and you think about it, and I immediately said, no, I'm just going to stick with my arms. But when I was driving home, I called my husband and, told him, what he said. And he's like, are you insane? Like, do both of them at the same time. And I guess mentally I hadn't prepared for that. And, I talked to my sister again because, she's really supportive in all this, and my mom, and they were like, do it. Why go through another surgery when you can combine them? And I am saving some costs because like the surgeon said, I'll save on anesthesia and operating room costs. So I called them up the next day and I said, I want to do both of them at the same time. And I had my pre-op appointment last week and that's where I'm at. So this whole journey that I've been on with lipedema has been so emotional. It's been something that's really made me come to terms with, like this condition. And I've had like ups and downs too recently, even with, making the choice for surgery. I remember talking to my husband on the phone and I was like, it is so unfair that I have to pay this price for a condition I did not ask for. And, that's where I'm at with this. I started therapy to go over some of these concerns. I have a lot of guilt for, using our money, our family money for something like this, even though it's not considered cosmetic, this is kind of like a life-saving surgery for me. It's preventing my mobility from getting worse. So I have to look at it that way, but it is a hard pill to swallow that I'm, at this point, but also I'm feeling very excited. I'm feeling hopeful. I, cannot wait to go back to the gym and actually see muscle development because the lipedema tissue isn't hiding it. I actually remember reading in one of my Facebook groups where this lady had recently had her lipedema surgery, and she said it was like, like an old house where you remove ugly carpet and you see like the beautiful hardwood floors underneath. She said that's what it was like when she got rid of the lipedema tissue on her calves. She finally saw her muscle and it was like seeing that hardwood floor. And I'm hopeful for that. So that's where I'm at. I have my surgery in 2 weeks and I will be documenting on this channel every week, how I'm healing and all that. So I hope you subscribe and like this video and follow me on this journey of my lipedema surgery. And it's been great talking to you.